What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Danny's to Talk. I'm your host, Robert, and today we are finally diving into the manga Tower Dungeon. So, Tower Dungeon is finally coming out in English print this week from Kodansha, and it's one that's kind of been on my radar for a while, and I knew that the physical release was coming up soon, so I was like, okay, hey, I'll go ahead and start reading it, and it's one I really enjoyed. So, this series is done by the author of this is Tsutomu Nihei, who probably a lot of y'all probably know him primarily from several series, but the main ones I'm gonna mention is Blom, Knights of Sidonia, and then a recent favorite that I enjoyed, which was a Kaina of the Great Snow Sea. That was a anime gem that came out maybe like a year or so ago that was really cool. So he's back again with Tower Dungeon. Now this is one that it's like I said, Volume One's coming out in English this week. So far in Japan, it only has 19 chapters, but they're pretty meaty chapters. So it's got 4 volumes altogether, as y'all have probably seen from the cover art of this video for the thumbnail. But so starting with this one, it follows a young guy named Yuva. Yuva is a what I would call a lovable goof. Because basically the setup and premise of Tower Dungeon is that in this world, I'm trying to think how to. I guess I can kind of like spoil like a little bit of like the beginning of the story. So the basic setup for this one centers around this sorcerer, or what we found out is a necromancer, ends up killing the king of this land and stealing the princess and taking her to this dungeon, tower dungeon specifically. So this tower descended from the sky. They do get into some things that led up to it, but basically it is just humongous, and I mean humongous tower that's kind of like slightly floating off the ground. And when I mean slightly, it's off the ground by a lot. So much so that there is like a cliffside that people have to walk up to access this dungeon. And so it's 100 uh, levels to this dungeon. And basically, the story centers around these characters going into this dungeon trying to rescue this princess. Now, immediately as I've read through some of these chapters, off the bat, I would say if you are a fan of Delicious in Dungeon, this is one I highly recommend just simply because of the fact of the cast of characters and the journey that they go on through this dungeon, because it is filled with all types of creepy, messed up looking creatures and all types of weird stuff going on, just like in Delicious in Dungeon, except for it's just, you know, no cooking shenanigans. Or maybe there is some food stuff, but not in the same vein as in Delicious in Dungeon. But that's what I want to throw out like early on. Like, hey, if you like that, this might be one you want to put your eyes on. But and so yeah, so that is kind of like the short, clean cut explanation for this. But one of the things that I enjoyed about this, because like I said, the main character name is Yuva, who he basically was living a very simple life. His family run the farm. It's like his grandparents, him and his little sister. And so when the princess gets kidnapped and a lot of the army gets defeated or whatever, they basically have to start recruiting people from all the different little neighboring towns and stuff. And so Yuva ends up getting basically volunteered, but he ends up being like, hey, yeah, I'll go, because he is extremely strong. Like, he is carrying around humongous bales of hay and wood and stuff. So he is a super strong dude, and very honorable as well. But so he ends up volunteering or whatever, and he ends up catching the wagon, going to this little town, uh, fortress set up outside of the tower, and that's pretty much where the adventures begin. And so, a couple of things with this series though is that like the art style of this is like very cool, very striking. Like it kind of has kind of like a sketchy vibe and look to it. That sometimes it's like sometimes you're like, okay, what am I looking at? But it is one that you have to kind of like sometimes like in a sense kind of like take a step back and look at the whole picture because there were some things that looked a little bit confusing when I first read through it. That when I went back, because I reread stuff in this first volume a few hours ago, just as like a little bit of a refresher for me, or whatever, and I kind of better understood some of the stuff I was looking at because I was like, oh, okay, I wasn't really fully grasping what I was looking at, but like I said, kind of like the kind of like sketchy nature of the art style really fits with like how dark and gritty this world is because just like Delicious in Dungeon, like nobody is safe, like there is danger around every corner, and that is one of the things that was so cool reading through this first volume that made me be like, hey, I need to continue reading. So I continued reading as far as I could on the Kmanga app before I had to go on beyond that. But just because, like I said earlier, with Yuva being such a lovable goof, to where sometimes he be walking somewhere, like, okay, like prime example, they were kind of like a little bit lost somewhere, whatever, and he got distracted. He's looking like, oh, what is that? Walked off the side of the edge of this thing, whatever, and then oh, they stumbled across the stairway that they need to get to the next level and stuff. Or him forgetting how strong he is, and he like smacks an enemy with his sword or club or whatever he has, and it busts through the wall, and him and the beast almost fall through the wall. And so it's a lot of different things like that that this guy sometimes stumbles into success, but he also shows over the course of this series that like nah, he actually has some heart and guts to him. Especially because as they continue going through this dungeon and stuff, he has a sense of like duty and resolve to him. Of like, okay, hey, I kind of got put into the situation, then kind of volunteered, but he is starting to find purpose in his role on the team and stuff. And so, but yeah, as I was kind of like reading through this, whatever, there'll be so many moments where you're going through and then you turn the page and then sometimes it's just like a sense of scale showing like these characters going up the stairway or being inside of like a very cavernous uh room within the dungeon, or some of the creatures and stuff that they encounter, either due to the size or just due to like how freaky they look. Because there was even a portion where they were sleeping or whatever, and somebody rolled over, had kind of like a freaked out look on their face, and like just kind of like tapped Yuba and was like, "Yo, uh, look at this, look up." And there's this weird creature just like in their room, just like clinging to the ceiling, or they were like finding like another passageway, and like some creepy thing was like slithering through the water. Like this series does really good of giving you that unsettling feeling of like really putting you in these characters' shoes and stuff. But yeah, like I said, that has kind of like been like the shining thing is just the sense of discovery, the sense of unknown. And also like the characters sometimes are not afraid when they are able to be like, hey, this is a bit much. Let's leave and come back, because they do have the ability to kind of come and go in and out of the dungeon as they will. Um, but at first it was kind of like it kind of was like, okay, maybe there's gonna be more to this, because like early on they get to like I think like the 80th floor. And you're like, okay, there's only 100 floors, and they made it to like the 80th floor in the first volume or whatever. Like, what the heck? But there are greater obstacles that happen, and things change in a sense to where it was like when they first made that run, they had a whole squad, a whole army of super powerful dudes, but then there was a royal decree that basically sent a lot of people home. And so then it was just Yuva and two other people initially was like, hey, we need y'all to continue this mission. Um, Kind of like in secrecy at first a little bit or whatever, but and then it's a whole different ballpark when you only have three kind of novice explorers in a sense, like the two other people that he was with are experienced in other ways, but as far as like traversing this dungeon, no, they're all kind of novices or whatever. But yeah, I said that kind of just added extra layers to it and stuff. But yeah, so Tower Dungeon, like I said, it is one that I highly recommend, and kind of speaking a little bit beyond this volume. So, um, like I said, if you enjoyed what I say so far, whatever, go pick up volume one. I will say though, real quick before I go into more though, whatever, is that this is a series that if you are going to be strictly a physical volume buyer, then I might would recommend potentially waiting for a few volumes because luckily, like volume one's coming out this week, volume two is like September, and volume three is like November. So we're gonna get 3 volumes before the end of the year. Like this is one that I might say, hey, you might want to wait and pick them all up in one fell swoop because, like I said, like when I read the first volume, I was like, yo, I need more right now, and I immediately jumped on the Kmanga app and started reading more from there. But bam. So going on a little bit more past what's in volume one. So, like I said, just the continued expansion of the different exploration bits of the tower, of the world, of the different creatures and cultures and stuff. It is kind of cool, and once again, kind of reminds me a little bit of Delicious in Dungeon, where you kind of start to see other groups of characters who also have to enter the dungeon for other exploration things, whatever, and them kind of crossing paths with Yuva and them forming a bigger squad and all this different stuff, whatever. Um, but yeah, it's just been such a very cool and very fun read. And like I said, like I caught up and I'm like, dang, I'm caught up now, so now I gotta wait. But it is what it is. I enjoyed reading what I did get to read, and yeah, this would definitely be one that hey, in a some months down the line or whatever, I'm gonna come back and catch up once there's another several chapters for me to read up on or whatever and stuff. So, but yeah, so Tower Dungeon out now physically in English. Like I said, I highly recommend going and picking it up. I had went to Barnes and Nobles a while ago just to kind of browse around because I was like, okay, I know it's coming out in a couple of days, but Barnes and Nobles like to put out stuff a little bit early, and sure enough, they had one copy. Now, at first, because you know they kind of had like this like end cap of like, hey, new release stuff, whatever, and I didn't see there now. I just see, uh, another recent favorite of mine, the Bugle Call, was still there front and center. But I didn't see Tower Dungeon, but I was like, you know what? I'ma just search around, sure enough, in alphabetical order in the shelves. It was mixed in there, whatever, and I found the one. I almost bought it, but I was like, you know what? I've already read the stuff in this volume a few times now, whatever, and it'll be selfish of me to buy the only copy, knowing that realistically it's really just gonna sit on the shelf behind me for who knows how long. And so I was like, you know what? I'd rather somebody that either might be purposely waiting for it to come out in English, or hey, just somebody just browsing the shelves and come across the title like, "Ooh, Tower Dungeon, what is this?" I'd rather find a proper home for a new discoverer. So, but anywho, so I'm gonna wrap things up there. So as always, thank you so much for watching and or listening. You can find me everywhere at Dan Needs to Talk. And let me know what you think of Tower Dungeon. Is this one that you are going to be reading for the first time, or is this one that you've already been kind of following for a little bit? But yeah, so I'm excited to see more of this series. So, but I'll catch you on the next one. Y'all be easy. Peace.